All right, today, guys, I've got kind of like a bench lab type video for you. I was doing some work around this XM stereo digital radio receiver and how to do a VIN unlock on it, and ended up having to build myself this custom harness out of the vehicle in order to debug that. And I thought it was worth sharing with you guys, how to build something like this and what you can do with it. So let me go ahead. I've got this powered up by a bench power supply, providing the 12 volts, and I've got it set up where it's wired to simulate turning the key into the run position. So I got a little switch down here that basically replicates that. You see it powers up the dash cluster, reads the odometer information from the body control module. So basically we got a powertrain control module, a body control module, an instrument panel controller module. We obviously have the radio head unit, and then we have a digital radio receiver. And all this stuff is set up and operational, right? The radio, I just put enough of a little piece of an antenna in here so you can get some reception. And then I actually have the XM radio shark fin is sitting up on top of the cabinet. But this guy is fully XM, operational. So what I'm going to show you is what you can do with this over with the Tech2. So I'm going to fire up my Tech2. And I'll show you that this is all operational stuff. So this particular set of gear came out of a 2004 Cavalier. I'm going to go down and set this up just as if I was in the vehicle, which is the main reason I built this, is to kind of simulate being in the vehicle without actually having to do a lot of experimentation. I'm going to use a J car because it's a Cavalier. And then I'm going to come into the body section. It's going to complain that it doesn't see an OnStar unit. That's normal. We didn't put that in. All right, and so here we can see the different things that are part of the body section of the Tech2. And of our setup here, we've got the body control module, the digital radio receiver, the instrument panel cluster, and the radio. And so you can come down and do different things with these, right? So I'm just going to work my way up from the bottom, and I just turn the radio off so you don't have that background noise. So I can come into the radio, I can check DTCs, just as if, I actually had it in the vehicle. There's obviously none here. I can come back and take a look at different data about the radio, module information. So I'm actually reading off the radio, pulling the part number, calibration ID that's been loaded from SPS most recently. I can come down and take a look at the cassette. It doesn't have one, but I could take a look at the CD and give me information about the CD. So it's reading this information live off the device. Similarly, I can come up and take a look at the digital radio receiver, the XM receiver. I can check DTCs there as well. Right, no codes there. I can take a look at the data coming from the DRR, digital radio receiver, right, showing the voltage coming from our bench power supply, 12.1 volts. You take a look at our bench power supply. That's exactly what we got pumping into it, 12.1 volts, simulating our radio. All right, and then I can also take a look at the instrument panel cluster, and I can see information about this guy as well. Now, there's not much to see on something like this. Let me see if I can get something that's more useful. How about we go into special functions, and we can do a gauge test. And so if you take a look at the gauges over here, right, we've got the fuel. Basically, there's no sensors hooked up to the PCM, so these things are sitting dead except for the fuel. If I come over here and I say coolant gauge sweep test, and I come over here and say I want to sweep this guy up, if you watch that temperature, you can do a test. You can walk him down, you can walk him up. It's something you could do in the vehicle if you were trying to test if you had a bad stepper motor in the back of this guy. So you can see this is all live and connected up and real. I can come up here and do a lamp test. If I come up here, you see some of these lights are just kind of sitting because they don't have sensors. But if I come down here on the Tech2 and I turn them all on, they can all come down. All come on. I can see if I got a burned out bulb or something like that. All right. So and then the last one here in the body control module. Similarly, I can come in. Now this guy's going to have some codes because he's very unhappy about not seeing a number of things hooked up, right? So the daytime running lamps aren't hooked up. We don't have information about the transmission control module. We don't have information about the circuits to various other things like the ignition and the horn. So he's going to have a bunch of codes here that continue on. But he's still live, right? So if I come back and take a look at data from the BCM, I'm still talking to the BCM, and I'm still pulling in information. I can see how much voltage he's getting. There's a bunch of false information about things that are hooked up. We do get information about whether we have the ignition 1 power or the accessory power, because we've wired it that way, and I'll get into that in just a moment. If I come back out and take a look at the diagnostic circuits for the body section, I can take a look at the DTC check for all of the modules. We can see only the BCM is showing diagnostic trouble codes at the moment. And we can come back over here. We can see on our Class 2 message monitor. Let's scroll down through this set of messages, and then we can see that all 4 of these modules that we've got hooked up here are active, or all 5 rather. So now let's take a look at the powertrain control module. I went back a little bit too far. Powertrain. This is a regular fueled engine with an automatic. I can come up here and I can see I do not have any DTCs for the powertrain control module at the moment. He's quite happy with this configuration. And I can come into data display, and I'm going to be able to get information about the engine. Of course, it's all going to be bogus because we don't have any sensors. But this is all live. So what I can do with something like this is I can come up here and either reprogram a different PCM on the bench and simulate what I would do in the vehicle and save myself going back and forth. So I just thought this would be useful sharing with you guys and show the kind of stuff that you could do with something like this, as well as allow me to put together some repair videos that I might not actually normally do because I don't have the repair, but I got this stuff up here. And at some point I'll show you what I ended up doing with the VIN unlock on this XM radio. So let's talk a little bit about what we've got hooked up here. I'm going to go ahead and disconnect the instrument panel piece to make it a little bit easier to see what's going on here. But we've got the original connectors cut off about maybe a foot each so that we had enough to wire. We've got them all wired up to the power supply with plus and minus, and then we've got the parts of the supply that would simulate being in the run position or ignition 1 or accessory in the case of the radio, hooked up to the switch to simulate the ignition switch being in that position. We've got our diagnostic link connector over here that we've got the Tech2 plugged into. So it's all very simplistic by today's standards, but this was pretty complex at the time in the early 2000s. So now let me talk to you about how you would wire this up. So I've got some copies of the actual sheets from the service manual, in this case from the Cavalier, and I'll just walk you through the different connections to do what I've got right over here. All right, starting with the diagnostic link connector. We're going to be interested in always ground on these different pages that we're doing, and most of them we're also going to have battery positive voltage so that we're going to be able to power it. And then we're also interested in Class 2 serial data. This is so we can establish the communications of the network that we're building so that the Tech2 scanner, or the MDI scanner for that matter, is able to see everything. So we're going to tie these 2 grounds together, and we're going to use our plus 12 volt DC for anything that says battery positive voltage. And then for our Class 2 serial data, this is going to come in from the connector, and it's going to go into the body control module first, and it's going to go into connector 2 B7. And that completes this one. Now from here, we're going to go into the body control module, connector 1. And on connector 1, there's only one thing that we're really interested in, which is this guy down here. And again, we're trying to complete our network, and that's B8. And B8 is going to go over to the radio, and it's going to go into connector C2. It's the big one on the back of the radio, A1. And that completes this piece. Now there's 3 connectors on the body control module, so let's move on to connector 2. Now connector 2 has got a lot going on. So just going down, from left to right, top to bottom, the first thing going down here that we're interested in is accessory voltage. This is going to actually be power for the radio. We're always looking for our body positive voltages and our grounds, right? So we're going to grab those guys as we go. We're interested in completing our network, and in this case we're going to need all 3 of these. And then we got another battery positive voltage. I always just go ahead and connect all of these positive voltages battery positive voltages and grounds whenever I run into them, just to be sure. And then moving down the other side, we're going to be interested in A2. This is going to provide us power so we can light up the odometer on the instrument cluster. Ignition 1 voltage, so we can simulate our key in the position, and another ground. And so we take these grounds here, here, and here, and we just tie them together into our ground nest, wherever it might be. We're going to take our 2 battery positive voltages and wire them to 12 volts DC. We're going to take our accessory voltage, connect it to our ignition 1 voltage, and this is actually going to go to a switch for our plus 12 volt DC, right, simulating the key. Our instrument panel lamp supply voltage is going to go over to our instrument panel cluster connector, and it's going to go to the B as in boy, connector for that. All right, and then we're going to go ahead and take this battery positive voltage and connect him up here to all 3 of these, right? So we got 3, 8, 11, 12, and 10 are all plus 12 volts DC. Now we've got our grounds, we've got our power, we've got some miscellaneous switched power, and we've got some side power to the instrument panel. Now we've got to complete our network. So we got B9, B8, and B7. Now B7 is going to go to the diagnostic link connector, pin 2. If we think back here just a little bit earlier, right, this is what we did here. To the BCM from the diagnostic link connector, BCM B7, and there we go, to pin 2, right? So we're just completing this schematic here. Now the next one, B8, this guy is going to go to the powertrain control module. And it's going to go to the powertrain control module's connector 1, pin 15. And then this last guy is going to go to the instrument panel cluster, pin L. All right, so that completes this page. Now we're going to go to the powertrain control module. Now the powertrain control module in connector 1, we're interested in, again, you know, we're hunting down the usual suspects here. We're interested in battery positive voltage. We're interested in ignition 1 voltage. And in this case, we're only interested in one of the network connections for what we did in our particular example, which is right here. All right, so this guy plus 12 volts DC, pardon my writing, and then switched 12 volt DC, and then this guy over here, this guy is going to go back to the BCM, connector 2, B8. And again, just showing you how this stuff kind of wraps and ties back together, right? We talked about here, connector 2 of the BCM, B8 going to the PCM, connector 115, PCM, connector 115, right? So we're just completing these circuits so that we can have the communications we're looking for. Okay, now we're going to move on to powertrain control module, connector 2. Now in connector 2, out of this whole thing, there's only one thing we want. It's the ground. As you noticed on connector 1, we only had our ignition 1 voltage and we had our battery positive voltage. We didn't have a ground there. Now if you look at these connectors, you know, some of these low references, sometimes these low references are tied to ground and they might be usable, and you'll see some cables for bench tuners that connect to a powertrain control module that might not use this ground, but I prefer to get it as close to the vehicle's wiring as I can, so I'm using the ground on connector 2. But that's all we need from that guy. All right, so now we get to the radio. Now the radio, they don't label these. They should, but they don't. This should really be thought of as C1 for consistency in the rest of the service manual. That's how you'll see it referred to, and you'll see this guy referred to as C2. This is the bigger of the two connectors. This is the smaller of the two connectors. Do the C1 guy first. So once again, we're trying to complete our network, so we want G. Now this is what accessory audio devices plug into in the radio. In our case, this is going to be where the digital radio receiver plugs into. So we're going to need to get our audio signals right and left and we're going to want to get a common for those so that we can actually hear what's coming out of the XM stereo. So the G connector is going to go to the digital radio receiver, pin 15. The H is going to go to pin 3. The J is going to go to pin 2. And the K is going to go to pin 10. This is going to, again, give us communication between the head unit and the XM stereo, and this is going to give us our audio, left and right channel. Now we're going to do the main connector on the radio, C2. So once again, we're going to be looking to complete our network. So we're interested in A1. We're interested in our grounds. We're interested in our body positive voltage. Here's another ground that we're after there. And when we complete these two, that we have enough connections to establish BCM to radio connectivity. So the two grounds here we'll just tie together. And then we'll take our battery positive 12 volts DC. And then this guy is the one that we were talking to on the body control module. It's going to go to BCM, the one we had off the connector C1, B8. Right? And now we've got the next page is the digital radio receiver. So, right off the bat, we know we want battery positive voltage and ground to power the device. We want to complete our network. We need to be able to get the sound out of it, so we need these guys. Now, this guy is going to go back to the connection that we made previously, right? He's going to go back to the radio connector C1G. Right? And that's the guy that we just did over here, right? So C1G, DRR15. And then these other ones are going to go back to C1 as well, of the radio. I'm just going to abbreviate these. So the left signal is going to go over to J. The right signal is going to go over to H. And then our common is going to go over to K. Right? So J and H and K will complete that. And then we have power to the unit and ground to the unit, and we have communications flowing all the way back to the body control module. Our last guy is the instrument panel cluster. First thing we spot, right? We spot our grounds, and we spot our body positive voltage to provide power. But in this particular module, it also needs to know when the key's in the run position for ignition 1 voltage. So we grab those. Then also we're going to need to do our communications. And in this case, the communications one that we're interested in is L. All right, so ground plus 12 volts DC. We'll take these two grounds together. Then we'll take our ignition 1 voltage, and that's going to go to our switch on the power. And then lastly, this guy, he's going to go all the way over to the BCM C2B9. And then again, just, kind of referencing it back, just always trying to show you, how this stuff ties together. If I go back and look at our body control module C2, we look at B9, we see that it's going over to IPCL. Sorry about that. I was looking at the wrong line for a second. And so that, once again, completes the connection. So I'm going to take you through and show you a few other things after this, but this just basically summarizes the wiring. If I slide over here and take a look at this, it's literally a hub of all of the orange battery positives coming together, and then I've soldered them together to give me a connection for the power supply. Similarly, all of the negatives soldered together so that I can pin this on, and then some tape to provide some insulation. This is not anything that's meant to be too permanent, right? Because this is just something I was using for a debug. And then all of these guys that are coming in from accessory voltage yellow, all of these pinks coming in here are all switched 12 volt DC for ignition 1 voltage. They go to the switch that simulates us being in the run position. So I hope this is useful to you guys. I hope you find it educational about this. I'll show you something else too on how you can expand something like this. So I'm just taking a look at the service manual from the Cavalier and the Sunfire for these years, and I'm taking a look at the diagnostic link connector section of the schematics. And you can see how what we were talking about gets done, right? So here's our DLC connector coming in, and we follow pin 2 that we talked about, right? We talked about pin 2 going to C2 B7 of the body control module, and then from there pin B9 of the cavity 2 goes out and over to L of the instrument panel cluster. Now if I still had other equipment that I wanted to do, like an SDM module, the airbag module, I could connect the daisy chain to that guy as well. Here we can see the BCM from B8, cavity 2 B8 goes down into the powertrain control module. If you were to continue that daisy chain, there's another line on the powertrain control module that would go down to the electronic brake control module. And you can get all this stuff set up on the bench. Here on the body control module, we come out of C1 B8 that we talked about, and we go down to C1 A1 of the radio head unit. And then we talked about from the small connector we call C2G, we head out into 15 of the digital radio receiver or the XM radio satellite receiver. You could continue this daisy chain further with the other connector and wire the serial data link down to the vehicle communication interface module, which is the OnStar unit. So this is very straightforward to expand and set up and get on the bench and do various things with that you might want to do and find interesting to test rather than having to do them actually in the vehicle. So I hope this was useful. If you got questions or comments about this particular setup, it should be okay with any kind of a PCM on a vehicle from 2002 to 2005. It looks like this with this particular part number, 125-87611. This whole setup, the BCMs are going to vary by cars. They're unique. Like this one was only going to be one that you would find in a Cavalier or a Sunfire, and the other vehicles in that era that might use the same PCM might have a different, or are going to have a different kind of BCM, but the head unit and the satellite receiver and all that should be pretty common. So if you got questions, leave a comment. I'll try to help. Otherwise, if you found this useful, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.